A wounded German shepherd emerged from the Montana snow, silently trailing a retired Navy SEAL named Ethan Walker. No growl, no bark, only desperate, intelligent eyes that refused to leave him. What began as a strange winter encounter unraveled a hidden microchip, falsified records, and a cruel dogfighting ring run by a powerful man willing to burn everything to the ground, including the dogs, to hide his secrets. As the storms grew colder, Ethan and the dog he named Ranger would face ambush, arson, and a deadly showdown that tested the meaning of loyalty and the courage to stand against darkness. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of faith, bravery, and the miracles that walk beside us every day. Sure? Winter pressed hard against the small Montana town, the sky heavy with snow and silence. Ethan Walker moved quietly through Frost Pine Market, the last open store before the storm swallowed the night. At 37, Ethan carried the rugged look of a man shaped by war. Broad shoulders, weathered skin, a square jaw marked by a faint scar running from the corner of his mouth to his jawline. His deep-set hazel eyes rarely revealed emotion, and the permanent tension in his posture came from years serving as a Navy SEAL, years filled with missions that had cost him more than he ever admitted. He walked with a slight stiffness in his left knee, a lingering injury from the operation that ended his career and took two of his closest teammates. Since then, he had chosen a life of isolation in a small wooden cabin at the edge of black timber forest, far from the noise and expectations of the world. People in town knew him as polite but distant, a man who nodded more than he spoke, who carried invisible ghosts behind every step. As Ethan pushed open the store's door, the warm air spilled into the frozen street. Snowflakes clung to his brown beanie and the rough fabric of his navy winter jacket. He adjusted the strap of the grocery bag slung over one arm, prepared to walk the long stretch of road leading back to his cabin. But the moment he stepped into the open, he felt it. That strange sensation of being watched. He paused, scanning the dim streetlights flickering along Main Street. And then he saw it. A large German shepherd stood partially hidden behind a row of snow-covered trash bins. The dog's coat, once surely thick and proud, was now matted and dirty, its black and tan fur tangled with frost and mud. Its right hind leg trembled under its weight, revealing a limp that suggested old injuries and fresh pain layered together. The dog stared at him, unmoving. Ethan frowned. "Go on," he muttered, waving a hand. "Find somewhere warm." But the dog didn't move. Only its breath appeared in soft white clouds, steady but strained. Ethan turned and continued walking. His boots crunched against the ice. The wind sliced at his coat. A few steps later he heard it, the faint sound of paws dragging through the snow. He stopped. The dog stopped. He walked again. The dog followed. Irritation flickered through him. He had seen stray dogs before, even injured ones. But this one didn't beg, didn't bark, didn't even attempt to approach. It simply followed like a shadow, as if tethered to him by some invisible thread. Ethan's mind churned with conflicted thoughts. Part of him wanted to chase it off. He had enough broken things in his life. Another part, quieter, buried, felt a pull he didn't understand. He remembered how he once worked with military dogs overseas, their loyalty unmatched, their courage breathtaking. He remembered Rex, the bomb detection K9, who died in an explosion Ethan survived. The memory tightened in his chest, a familiar ache he refused to revisit. The snow thickened on the road as Ethan left the edge of town. Streetlights vanished behind him, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. His cabin stood dimly lit ahead, a lonely shape against the endless white. When he reached the wooden steps, he finally turned. The dog stood 10 feet away, chest rising and falling with exhaustion, paws half buried in snow. Snowflakes clung to the dog's muzzle, and frost coated its whiskers. It didn't whine, didn't plead. It simply waited, silent and solemn, as if asking a question Ethan didn't yet understand. "Are you serious?" Ethan grumbled under his breath. He stepped inside, set his groceries down, and moved to the window. Through the frosted glass, he saw the dog curl up on the bottom step of his porch, tucking its nose under its tail as the wind howled. A muscle in Ethan's jaw twitched. He told himself it wasn't his problem. The dog could leave any time. It chose to be there, and yet something about its stillness, its quiet endurance, burrowed painfully under his ribs. Minutes felt like hours. The temperature continued to drop. Ethan noticed the dog's body shudder violently from the cold. Its ears pressed flat against its head, not in fear, but in resignation. The sight unsettled him more than he expected. He cursed under his breath, grabbed an old red flannel blanket from his closet, and opened the front door. Cold air blasted into his face. The dog didn't lift its head until Ethan stepped closer. "This is just for tonight," he said firmly, tossing the blanket onto the step. "Don't get comfortable." The dog raised its eyes toward him, deep brown, rich and unreadable, eyes that held a strange intelligence, almost human-like, in their quiet pleading. The gaze pierced something Ethan had long thought frozen. He felt the tightness in his chest again, but this time it wasn't grief. It was recognition. Something had happened to this animal, something terrible, and for reasons beyond logic, it had chosen him. He did not like the feeling it awakened in him. He didn't want connection, responsibility, or the echo of old wounds. Still, he didn't close the door immediately. He stood there staring at the dog as the winter wind swept around them. The cabin light spilled onto the snow, casting faint halos around the dog's battered form. "Fine," he muttered. "One night. That's it." He stepped back, leaving the door cracked open just enough for the warmth to reach the porch. As Ethan turned away, something inside him shifted, small but undeniable, like a locked door creaking open after years of silence. He didn't know why the dog had picked him. He didn't know what tragedy lay behind those scars. But one thing was certain. Tonight was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. Morning frost clung to every rooftop and pine branch as the winter sun rose pale and distant over the Montana Valley. Ethan Walker stepped out of his cabin with the injured German shepherd walking close beside him, the snow squeaking under their steps. The dog limped slightly, but there was a quiet determination in the way he tried to keep pace with Ethan, like he didn't want to fall behind, not even for a second. Ethan felt the weight of the night before lingering in his chest. He wasn't a man used to letting anything into his life anymore. After years of Navy SEAL deployments, the friendships lost in combat, and the haunting silence that followed a failed mission in Helmand Province, Ethan had trained himself to shut doors before they could reopen old wounds. But the dog, this scarred, silent creature, had forced its way into his thoughts, into his porch, and now into his morning. He still pretended it was temporary, just a practical act of kindness. But deep down, he felt something shifting, though his pride wouldn't let him name it. They reached the old military veterinary outpost just outside town, a squat concrete building with faded signage and a chain-link fence leaning tiredly under the snow. The facility had once served military working dogs stationed in the region, and after its closure, it was kept alive by Emily Carter, a former Army combat medic who had taken over the site to treat local rescue animals. Emily was in her early 30s, slender and slightly taller than average, with sandy blonde hair tied messily into a low ponytail. Her skin was pale from long hours indoors, and her light green eyes carried a mix of warmth and exhaustion. Emily always moved with the quiet precision of someone trained to save lives under pressure, though a slight shake in her hands, barely noticeable, hinted at her own scars from trauma she rarely spoke of. Rumor in town was that she'd survived an IED explosion that killed 2 of her team members, leaving her with lingering survivor's guilt. Ethan had never asked. He respected silence the way she respected boundaries. "Morning," Emily said as Ethan pushed open the heavy door. Her voice was soft but alert, rising with curiosity when she saw the dog at his side. "This the one who followed you home?" Ethan nodded, crouching to help the dog step over the slick tile floor. "He wouldn't leave. Injured. Quiet. Too quiet." Emily's eyebrows knit as she knelt to examine him. "Let's have a look at you, big guy." The dog stood perfectly still while she ran her hands gently over his ribs, checking scars, bruises, and tenderness. She frowned at nearly every inch she inspected. Multiple healed lacerations, old fractures. Somebody hurt him more than once. He's been through hell. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "Yeah, I figured." Emily reached for the handheld microchip scanner, a small device with chipped paint and scratches from years of use. "Let's see who he belongs to," she murmured, passing the scanner slowly along the dog's neck. A sharp beep echoed in the exam room. The device displayed a number, and Emily typed it into her tablet. The moment the registration page loaded, her face drained of color. She blinked, then blinked again, as if hoping the information would change. "What is it?" Ethan asked, sensing danger in the silence. Emily swallowed hard. "The chip is registered under someone named Jack Morris. But that's not a real name. It's a placeholder. Something used when someone wants to hide ownership." Ethan's pulse tightened. "So who does he belong to?" Emily turned the tablet toward him. The listed address was unmistakable. "William Cross," she whispered. Ethan knew that name. Everyone in the valley did. William Cross was a wealthy ranch owner in his 50s, tall, broad, and impeccably groomed, always wearing long black coats and polished boots. A charming public figure with piercing slate-gray eyes and a smile that never reached them, he had a reputation for being generous in front of cameras and ruthless when no one was watching. Rumors circulated for years about illegal operations on his sprawling property, unlicensed breeding, underground gambling, and a secret dog-fighting ring whispered about in fear. But nothing had ever been proven, partly because Cross had friends in law enforcement and influence in town politics. The idea that this broken, trembling dog once lived on Cross's property made Ethan's stomach knot with anger he hadn't felt so sharply since his military days. Emily stood slowly, lowering her voice. "Ethan, this dog isn't just a stray. He's running from something. Or someone." Ethan crouched, meeting the dog's eyes. They were deep brown, gentle but dimmed with past suffering. Eyes that carried fear, memory, and something else. Trust. A trust Ethan didn't ask for, but now felt responsible for. "You need a name," Ethan murmured. He hesitated, then said softly, "Ranger." The dog's ears twitched. His eyes lifted, warm but wounded, as if recognizing something in the sound. As they left the clinic, Ethan kept one hand on Ranger's shoulder, steadying the dog as he limped down the steps. The cold wind whipped through the trees, carrying the sharp smell of pine and distant chimney smoke. But then Ranger froze. Every hair on his back stood up. His body stiffened, and he pressed himself hard against Ethan's leg, trembling, not from cold but from fear. His gaze locked on an unseen presence across the road, somewhere behind the tree line. Ethan scanned the shadows, instincts sharpening. Nobody stood there, nothing moved. But Ranger recognized a scent, a memory, a threat. And in that moment, Ethan realized this was more dangerous than he had imagined. Snowfall thickened over the Montana Valley as dusk settled, turning the forest around Ethan Walker's cabin into a maze of white shadows and muffled sound. The cold pressed heavily against the windows, and the faint glow of the cabin lights carved out a fragile warmth against the vast winter silence. Ethan stood by the front window, his posture stiff, his breath steady but heavy with unease. His instincts, honed through years as a Navy SEAL, were never wrong about danger, and danger was circling. For 3 nights in a row, He had seen the same unfamiliar black pickup truck slowly pass the narrow forest road near his property. It wasn't a local vehicle. He knew every truck, every snowmobile, every rancher's rusty Ford in this region. This one was different, new, tinted, and deliberate. The kind of vehicle that moved with people who didn't care to be recognized. Each time it passed, the headlights dimmed slightly, as if the driver wanted to see without being seen. And each night, Ranger reacted before Ethan did. The German shepherd's ears would snap upright, his muscles locking into rigid tension, his nose flaring in panic rather than curiosity. Tonight was no exception. Ranger lay near the fireplace, but at the faint crunch of gravel outside, his head jerked up, his body shivered, not from the cold but from memory. The dog's eyes widened, and he moved slowly toward Ethan, pressing the side of his large body against Ethan's leg. His weight trembled. Ethan lowered a hand, placing it on Ranger's head. He didn't have to speak. The look the dog gave him, wide, pleading, afraid, told him everything. Someone was looking for him, and not with good intentions. Ethan scanned the tree line beyond the truck's last position. The forest here was dense, the tall pines towering over everything like ancient sentinels. It wasn't unusual to see hunters or hikers this time of year, but what he saw next froze him. Two figures standing partially concealed behind the trees, silhouettes motionless against the white snow. Their postures were wrong, too rigid, too focused. Not wanderers, not neighbors. Men watching, men who knew exactly what they wanted, men who were here for Ranger. Ethan's jaw tightened, the old instinctive fire igniting in his chest. That burning readiness, the one he thought he had left behind in Afghanistan, roared back to life. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He processed, calculated, observed. Every inch of him was the soldier he had once been. "They want you back," he murmured to Ranger, his voice low, steady, but carrying the weight of a man who had seen this pattern before. "Whoever they are, they're not leaving empty-handed." But the dog pressed harder against him, trembling. Ethan hated that tremble. It spoke of things he couldn't see but could feel: brutality, darkness, trauma buried deep in the animal's bones. Ranger had been quiet in the cabin since arriving, but the nights revealed the truth. Ethan had woken twice to the shepherd thrashing in his sleep, whimpering, legs kicking as if running from something monstrous. Once, the dog had let out a piercing howl, raw and broken, before bolting upright, chest heaving, eyes filled with a terror Ethan recognized too well. It was the same terror he had seen in soldiers waking from battlefield nightmares. Tonight, while the men outside watched, Ranger's entire body carried the same tremor. Ethan knelt and ran a hand down the dog's back, fingers tracing the fur until they hit raised scars. Long, thick, uneven, not the kind of scars from accidents or abuse. They were patterned, intentional, strategic, scars of survival, scars of combat. His breath hitched as he felt deeper. The marks ran across Ranger's ribs, shoulders, even along his hind legs. These were wounds from fighting, serious, repeated fighting, not animal scuffles. These were wounds from being forced to battle for survival. A cold anger rose in Ethan's chest. They made you fight. It wasn't a question. Ranger's eyes dropped, his ears folding back as if the memory alone was enough to make him smaller. Ethan exhaled through clenched teeth. He had seen cruelty overseas, but nothing about hurting animals ever made sense to him. It was the kind of darkness that felt pointless, empty, evil. The next morning, he drove Ranger back to the old military clinic where Emily Carter was already sifting through old digital files. She had pulled an all-nighter trying to understand the microchip registration. Emily, with her tired eyes and steady hands, always looked composed, but today something in her expression had shifted, a tightening around her mouth, a worry she couldn't hide. "I found something," she said, waving Ethan over. Displayed on her screen were records of missing dogs reported across the county in the last 2 years, Some were strays. Some were family pets stolen from backyards. Emily scrolled until she stopped at a name that made Ethan's stomach drop. Titan. A German shepherd, same markings, same estimated age, same breeding line. Ranger's litter mate, Emily said quietly. He died 8 months ago at a clinic 2 towns over. Cause of death? Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, injuries consistent with dogfighting. Ranger, standing beside Ethan, let out a soft, pained whine, as though he recognized the name. Emily continued, her voice trembling now. Look at the last note. Titan arrived with severe injuries. The vet said the pattern suggested he'd been forced to fight another dog trained the same way, likely one from the same litter. Ethan's throat clenched. The truth slammed into him with brutal clarity. Ranger hadn't just escaped from a fighting ring. He had escaped from a ring where he was forced to fight his own brother and survive by killing him. Ethan closed his eyes, breath shaking. Ranger nudged his hand, eyes filled with a sorrow too deep for a creature that couldn't speak. You didn't choose that, Ethan whispered. You didn't want to hurt him. Something in the dog's gaze softened, as if acknowledging the words. Emily then showed another file. Old training logs from when William Cross sent young dogs for basic conditioning. Back then, Ethan had volunteered at the facility during recovery from his own injury, and in the blurry photograph of 2 small shepherd pups, he recognized the pair, Titan and Ranger, tiny, playful, tumbling over each other. He had held them once. He had tended a cut on Ranger's paw as a puppy. He remembered how Ranger had rested his head against Ethan's boot afterward, seeking comfort even then. That's why he found you, Emily whispered softly. He remembered you. The only gentle place from his past. Ethan knelt in front of Ranger, who leaned into him with absolute trust. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something inside him crack open. Not pain, not grief, but a fierce, protective tenderness. Ranger had chosen him. Ranger had trusted him. And now Ethan understood exactly why. A sharp winter wind swept across the Montana timberline, carrying the scent of pine, ice, and something darker buried beneath the cold. Inside Ethan Walker's cabin, the dim yellow glow of a desk lamp lit the room while documents, maps, and old veterinary records were spread across the wooden surface. Ethan leaned over them, his jaw set tight, the muscles in his forearms tense beneath the sleeves of his flannel shirt. His deep hazel eyes, always alert, always calculating, moved over each line of text with a soldier's precision and a survivor's heavy caution. Years as a Navy SEAL had shaped him into a man who trusted patterns, instincts, and evidence more than words, and all the evidence pointed toward something monstrous. Emily Carter sat across from him, her hunched posture revealing hours of exhaustion. Her sandy blonde hair, usually tied neatly at the clinic, now fell messily around her pale face. Emily's green eyes scanned vaccination logs, and every few seconds she rubbed her temples with shaking fingers, hands that had once treated wounded soldiers under gunfire, now trembling under the weight of discovering cruelty of a different kind. Despite her fear, she was steadfast. The trauma she carried from the battlefield had carved a quiet resilience in her. When Emily believed something was wrong, she pursued the truth with unwavering conviction. Ranger lay between them on the rug, his black and tan coat catching the lamplight. The German shepherd's ears flicked at every sound outside, his breath steady but alert. He was recovering, but the nightmares lingered. Now and then his muscles tightened, as if remembering the cage, the ring, the fight. Ethan would pause, reach down, and rest a hand on Ranger's back, grounding the dog and himself. It was as if both of them were learning to breathe again. They had spent days gathering evidence against William Cross. Cross, with his silver-streaked hair always slicked back and tailored coats that reflected his arrogance, had built a reputation as a respected ranch owner, but beneath the polished public image lay a man feared in whispers. People in town described him as charismatic, but cold, his storm-gray eyes always calculating. Cross walked like a man who believed he owned everything he touched, And the more Ethan uncovered, the clearer the truth became. Cross didn't just own dogs. He controlled their lives, their suffering, and their deaths. Emily tapped a file with her trembling finger. Look at this. Every registration is under a fake name. Different aliases, different addresses, all leading back to one property. Ethan leaned closer. He thinks he's untouchable. Emily nodded. He's been falsifying vaccination records too. Some dogs have measurements and weights identical to others, clones on paper. But in reality, they're the ones who disappeared. Ethan's chest tightened with a cold, familiar anger. And Ranger? Emily turned her tablet toward him. His GPS tracker pinged at 3 buildings deep in Cross's private forest. 3 structures with no windows, no ventilation, no permits. They're hidden arenas, enclosed, soundproof. Ranger lifted his head at the word arenas, letting out a low rumble in his throat. The kind that wasn't aggression, but recognition. Before they could compile their files, a loud vibration buzzed across Ethan's phone. A message from a local rancher he trusted. Ethan read it, and his face drained of color. Emily, it's Cross's kennels. Someone reported flames. Huge flames. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his coat. Emily rushed for her medical bag. Ranger bounded up, his instincts flaring. The bond between man and dog had grown into something wordless, something carved out of mutual pain and quiet trust. He knew they were going into danger again. The drive was a blur of freezing wind and dark roads. Ethan pushed the truck harder than he should have, the tires grinding through the snow. The moment they rounded the last bend, a searing wall of orange light slammed into their vision. Flames towered into the sky, devouring the entire kennel facility. Sparks rained down like burning snowflakes. The heat hit them even through the windshield. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. He's burning evidence. Emily stared in horror. There are dogs inside. Ranger barked sharply. Fear, urgency, desperation, all tangled together. Ethan stopped the truck, and before the engine fully died, Ranger leapt out, sprinting toward the inferno. "Ranger!" Ethan shouted, but the dog didn't slow. Emily clutched her bag and hurried after them. The sound hit them next. The heart-shredding howls of over 30 trapped dogs echoing through collapsing timber and roaring flames. It was a sound that pierced Ethan deeper than any battlefield scream. Without hesitation, he yanked off his flannel shirt, soaked it in snow, wrapped it around his face, and charged into the smoke-filled entryway. Ranger dove ahead, weaving between chunks of falling debris, with the memory of a former prisoner who knew exactly what horror lay inside. Emily followed, covering her mouth with a wet cloth, eyes stinging from smoke but driven by raw determination. The heat was unbearable. Every breath was like inhaling fire. Ethan kicked open the first row of cages, coughing hard, as terrified dogs bolted toward the exit. Ranger barked sharply, guiding them like a seasoned working dog. Emily used metal tools to break locks, while Ethan lifted smaller dogs into Ranger's path, shouting over the roar, "Go, go!" They moved as a unit, man, medic, and dog, breaking lock after lock, guiding life through the flames. Ranger even dragged a small corgi mix by its collar when the dog refused to move from fear. Ethan's lungs screamed. His head spun, but he pushed through. He always pushed through, until Ranger collapsed. It happened near the final row. Ethan saw the shepherd's legs buckle, saw his chest heave in desperate, shallow breaths as smoke overwhelmed him. "No! Ranger!" Ethan scooped the 90-pound dog into his arms, every muscle burning as he staggered toward the shattered doorway. Emily ran beside him, shouting for him to keep going. The night air hit them like ice as they crashed out of the burning building, snow melting instantly around their feet. Ethan fell to his knees with Ranger in his arms, coughing violently, pressing the dog's chest, checking his pulse. Ranger wheezed weakly, eyes half closed. Emily dropped beside them, pulling out an oxygen mask from her bag. "He's alive! Just get him air!" Ethan lifted Ranger's head gently, and that's when he saw him. Through the wave of heat and drifting ash, a black SUV sat at the edge of the property, its headlights off, and leaning calmly against the door, coat untouched by snow or smoke, stood William Cross. His expression was unreadable, but his storm-gray eyes gleamed with something chilling, almost satisfied. He watched the flames, not with fear or panic, but with ownership. Ethan froze. Ranger whimpered softly in his arms, and Cross did not move. He simply observed. Snow billowed fiercely across the burning ruins, the flames painting the winter night in violent shades of orange and gold. Ethan Walker stood in front of the collapsing kennel building, his breath clouding in the freezing air as the inferno roared behind him. Ranger lay at his feet, still coughing from smoke inhalation, his black and tan fur streaked with soot, his body trembling in a battle between loyalty and exhaustion. Emily Carter rushed to Ranger's side, her pale face streaked with ash, her green eyes sharp with both fear and determination as she adjusted the small oxygen mask over the shepherd's muzzle. The snow around them hissed as embers landed and melted into steam. Ethan's body ached, every muscle screaming from dragging dogs out of cages, lifting debris, and carrying Ranger's collapsing weight through the burning building. But none of that pain compared to the fury now rising in his chest, the same cold, controlled rage he once carried on missions overseas. His hazel eyes narrowed as headlights appeared through the swirling smoke. A powerful black SUV rolled toward them, followed by two more vehicles. Doors opened, boots crunched in the snow, and William Cross stepped forward. Cross looked even more sinister under the firelight, his tailored black coat reflecting flickers of orange, his silver-streaked hair perfectly unmoved by the wind, as if the chaos he created never touched him. His slate-gray eyes gleamed with venomous calmness. Behind him were four armed enforcers, each rugged and dangerous-looking in his own way. One was tall and heavy-set, with a dark beard and thick brows, his breath puffing like smoke from a bull ready to charge. Another was leaner, with narrow eyes and a twitch in his jaw that revealed a barely restrained aggression. The remaining two were similarly dressed in tactical jackets, their hands already resting on holstered weapons. They were men accustomed to violence, men who followed Cross without question. Cross's voice sliced through the wind. "That dog is my property. Bring him here." Ethan stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself between the armed men and Ranger. His posture changed, shoulders squared, stance grounded, breath steady. The soldier in him came alive with frightening clarity. "No," Ethan said, his tone low, steel hard. "A man like you doesn't deserve to own a living thing." Cross smirked, raising one hand. "Stand aside, Mr. Walker. You have no idea what you're interfering with." Ethan shook his head. "I've seen cages like yours in war zones. I know exactly what you are." Cross's expression darkened. His fingers twitched. Last chance. Behind Ethan, Emily clutched her phone, her hands shaking but purposeful. She had turned on the camera earlier, recording everything, the fire, the cages, the dogs, and now Cross confronting Ethan with armed men. She was terrified, but she refused to back down. The strength she once used to save wounded soldiers now poured into protecting Ranger and exposing the truth. One of the gunmen stepped forward, leveling his weapon. The sharp, violent click of a safety being switched off cracked through the air like thunder. Ranger, sensing the threat, tried to get up, but his legs wobbled. Ethan spread his arms wider. "You shoot that dog, you shoot me first." Cross nodded coldly. "Fine." A trigger snapped. The gun fired. The moment stretched. Snow hanging frozen in the air, flames roaring in slow motion, but Ethan was faster. Years of battlefield reflexes surged back. He lunged, slamming his shoulder into the gunman and knocking the weapon sideways. The bullet tore through the air, missing Ranger by inches and shattering a wooden beam behind them. Ethan grabbed the gunman's wrist, twisted hard, and tore the weapon from his grip. The man let out a roar of pain. Ranger, driven by instinct stronger than injury, launched himself forward. His body was tired, legs weak, but his spirit burned fiercely. He latched onto the leg of the second gunman, dragging him down into the snow. The man cursed, trying to shake the dog off, but Ranger held on with everything he had, not out of violence, but out of loyalty, out of love, out of the desperate will to protect the man who had saved him. Emily screamed, "I've recorded everything, Cross. You're finished." Her voice cracked through the chaos like lightning. The distant wail of police sirens began to rise over the howling wind. Red and blue lights flickered on the horizon. Cross spun toward the sound, fury twisting his dignified mask into something feral. His men panicked, some backing away, others dropping their weapons at the sight of law enforcement approaching fast. Cross tried to flee to his SUV, but it was too late. Police cruisers skidded into the clearing. Officers poured out, guns drawn, shouting commands that echoed across the burning wreckage. "Hands where we can see them! On the ground!" The gunmen dropped instantly, their bravado evaporating in the face of real authority. Cross resisted, yelling about influence, connections, power, but the officers weren't listening. They yanked his arms behind him, snapping handcuffs into place. Emily kept recording, breath trembling with relief and adrenaline. Ethan, chest heaving, looked down as Ranger released the gunman and stumbled back to his side. The shepherd pressed against him, exhausted but alive. The evidence was overwhelming. Fraudulent documents, the burning kennels, witness accounts, and Emily's footage of Cross attempting armed recovery and violence. It was enough to drag him before a federal court and dismantle his entire operation. The nightmare was over. In the quiet weeks that followed, the Montana winter softened. Ethan officially adopted Ranger, signing the papers with steady hands and a heart he didn't realize had begun to heal. Ranger's nightmares faded slowly, replaced by mornings where the dog would nudge. Ethan awake with a soft bark, tail wagging for the first time without fear. Emily visited often, helping Ranger through physical therapy, her gentle voice and patient hands becoming a warm constant in both their lives. And though Ethan still carried the weight of old ghosts, he no longer carried them alone. Man and dog, both once broken, found something like peace, something like home, something like family. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels or blinding light. Sometimes they come limping out of the cold, scarred, and trembling, reminding us that God still works quietly through the broken things of this world. Ranger and Ethan found each other in their darkest hours, and in that meeting, grace took shape in a way no one could deny. Maybe that is what God asks of us in our daily lives, to pay attention, to open our doors, and to let compassion move us even when it scares us. Because a single small act of kindness can save a life, heal a heart, or guide someone back from the edge. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, let us know your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles that walk quietly beside us every day. May God bless you, protect you, and surround your home with peace and light. And may He guide every wounded heart, human or animal, toward the love they deserve.